We are on Vova Beis. We started yesterday the Gemara Amamar, and we spoke about the Bika. We spoke about the Bika. The Bika, as we know, we're on Vova Beis. We are on six in the art scroll. It's 6b4. We said about a Bika, a valley. A valley has a status of a Carmelis as an area that's these are fields, they're open fields. They have the status, they're not just a yachid, they're not private, they're open. But they're also not a Rishut Harabim. We said it's not a Rishut Harabim, it's not a public thoroughfare area, but rather it's a Carmelit that has a rabbinic designation of an area that you can't carry for Amot, you can't carry from public to private, from public to this valley, or vice versa, or from private to this valley. We said it has the status of a Carmelit. So that's what the Gemara is going to focus on. Bika, Eina, you said a Bika is Eina Kirshuta Yachid, the Lokus Yach, Lokus Rabim. You told me that a bika is not like a Rishut Yachid and not like a Rishut Rabim. You told me it doesn't have a status of public or private. It's this in-between state. We learned in the Mishnah in Tairot, a bika, the valley, b'yamot hachama, during the summertime. B'yamot hachama, during the summertime, the valley has a status of Rishut Yachid, the Shabbat. Regarding Shabbat, in the summertime, the valley is not considered public property because again, and it will never, the valley will never be considered. We'll see whether it's the summer or whether it's the winter. We say that the valley. Let's see, b'yamot hachama, when it comes to morning, Ralph.
Morning, Rabbi.
6b4. We're talking about this valley, this open field, this area of open fields, which we said has a status of a Carmelit. This is open fields. It's not surrounded by any gate. It has some resemblance to public because people go there, and it's not off limits from people, but yet it's not exactly public. It's not the common thoroughfare of people, and therefore it does not have a status of public, and also it's not private. So we said this area, this Carmelit, morning Asaf, we said this Carmelit is this valley, these fields, you can't carry from public into these fields or from private into these fields. It has a status of a Carmelit, a rabbinic domain that's forbidden rabbinically to carry. And the Gemara is questioning this because we find in Mishnah and Tairot that talks about the valley regarding Shabbat. It says that the valley has a status of private property. It says, Habika b'yamot hachama, it says if it's the summertime, the valley has a status of private property regarding the laws of Shabbat. Regarding the laws of Tumah, we'll explain that in a minute, it has a status of public property in the summertime, Rishut Rabim regarding Tumah, and B'yamot HaGashamim, during the winter time, it has a status of private, Rishut Yachid, the Kan, both regarding Shabbat and both regarding Tumah. Now, what's going on with the summer and the winter? So, the fields, they would put seeds, they would sow the seeds to grow things close to right before the rain, right? They plant the seeds and the rain would come and help the seeds grow. And now when the seeds begin to grow, people do not walk on those fields because they don't want to step on the seeds. However, after the produce is cut and so after it was harvested and it's in the fields, the people have a right to go on those fields If they want to go ahead, they have the right to travel on those fields. And this was a takana that people have a right to go ahead and travel through those fields that Yeshua made to shorten their traveling. And now the Mishnah tells us that even though there were people that actually during the summer months, people will actually, go through those fields during the summer months. There were some people that would go through those fields during the summer months because already the produce has already been cut. It's not the time of, it's not where it's starting to grow. So since there are people that go there, so nevertheless, so we say the fields still have a status of private regarding the laws of Shabbat. Why they are considered private property regarding Shabbat? Because most people don't go from the street through fields, even though they have the right to go through these fields, but most people don't. It's not the common traveling, it's not through fields. And therefore, regarding the laws of Shabbat, it's not public. Like we said, to be considered public property, it would have to be the common place where people walk, common place, common street, people travel. And since the field is not the place that people would commonly travel, even if they had a right to go through these fields, so therefore it does not have a status of public property, and it says it has a status of private. It's considered private. However, regarding the laws of Tumah, the laws of contamination, the laws of contamination, even though the fact that there's a small amount of people that do travel in the summer on these fields, that they go through these fields, but that's not called private, that's not called private regarding the laws of contamination. Because contamination, to be considered private, it has to be something that nobody would go there at all. Just like the story we said yesterday of the Sotah. What's the case of contamination? When if a man is alone with someone else's wife, they were warned not to be alone. He warned his wife not to be alone with this man, and she was alone with this man. We welcome Emmanuel, morning Emmanuel, and she was alone with this man, and we don't know if they had relations in that room. They were there for enough time they could have had relations. We don't know what happened. It was a whole process that she has to go to the Kohen. We have to write certain psukim from the Torah, certain psukim, and we put those in water, and she drinks it. And if she's innocent, nothing would happen to her. And if she would be guilty, she would blow up, she would die. Now, until she drinks the water, there's a process. It takes time from the time, let's say she was living in Tel Aviv, and it happened in Tel Aviv that she violated the warning. Now she has to go, and she was alone with this man. We don't know what happened in the room. She has to now travel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, to the Beit HaMikdash, to the Kohen, and that takes time. And from the time that she violated the warning, she was alone with the man, she's forbidden to be with her husband, even she's a married woman. And it's a question whether she had relations with this other man in the room, didn't have relations. So it's a safek, the question, whether she became contaminated or not, whether she became defiled or contaminated through this act with this other man. And we say until we have clarity, she's forbidden to be with her husband. So we say safek tumah. It's this question of contamination in private area. She was alone. So we say, and the Torah teaches us that when you have a question in a private area of contamination, we say tameh. The Torah tells us it's contaminated. We treat it like it's tameh. So therefore, that's a lesson. Anytime you have a situation in a private area where you don't know if someone became contaminated more than anything or not, so you say it's safek tumah, it's safek of contamination. A private area would be tameh, would be contaminated. We consider it contaminated, just like the story of the sota. So So since this, when it comes to the law of contamination, we learn from sota, so it has to be similar to sota. So since sota is nobody else is there, it's total private between the man and this woman. So therefore, any similar case of possible contamination has to be similar. So therefore, let's say there's a question whether there was a dead body in this field or not. Let's say in this valley, was there a dead body? The Kohen walked through this place, and let's say we don't know whether the Kohen came in contact with the dead body in this valley or not. So the fact that this is still not such a private area, it's open for people to walk into this valley during the summer months. So therefore, regarding the summer months, it would have a status of public property. It would not be considered private regarding the laws of contamination. However, regarding the laws of Shabbat, to be considered public property regarding Shabbat, it has to be a common place where people travel, the normal place of travel. And the field is not the normal place that people travel. So therefore, regarding Shabbat, it will not be considered public property. Okay? So we say in the summertime that this field is considered regarding Shabbat, it's not public, and yet it calls it private. And regarding Tumah, regarding contamination, we say it's considered public regarding the summertime. However, B'yamot HaGshamim, in the rainy season, the rainy time of the year, where the seeds start growing. So since the seeds start growing, nobody walks into those fields. No one's allowed to walk. No one walks into the field. They don't walk. They don't walk into the fields. So therefore, even the valley would also be considered private regarding contamination because it's totally off limits. So therefore, in the winter, in the rainy season, is considered private both regarding Shabbat and both regarding contamination. So the Gemara says, so what do we see? So we see from here that the valley does not have a status of a makom of a Carmelite, right? You said before that when you say something is called a Carmelite means that on a Torah level, it's considered a place of exemption, and mokum patur. On a rabbinic level, it has a status it's forbidden. And here we see that the valley we see has a status of a regarding Shabbat. It says it's a reshut hayachid. It said it's considered private property, at least on a Torah level. It's considered private property. So you see that it's considered private. So that's the Gemara's question. You told me that the valley is considered Carmelite. It's considered a rabbinically. It's not considered public or private on a Torah level. And here we see that it's considered private. So the Gemara answers the following. Rav Ashi, so Ula says no. Really, la'olam Carmelite habi. Really, this valley is a Carmelite. It's not a private property on a Torah level. But the reason why we call it a private property, why we call it a private property, is lefi she'eino reshut harabim. You say this is called private compared to being public. It's called private. Meaning because of the fact that it's not a place that most people travel, so you'll call it. It's not public. So I refer to it as private, but it's not really. I don't really mean that it has a status of private property. That if you would carry from public property into this valley, into this field, you would be violating the Shabbat on a Torah level. But the reason I call it private is to say, meaning to say, when you want to say something's not public, someone say this is private. But it might not be really private. It might not be really considered private property, but just to say that it's not public, I refer to it as private. That's one approach of the Gemara. And really meaning I want to show the difference between Tumah and really the focus. The reason why I said it that way is because I want to emphasize the difference between contamination and Shabbat. Because regarding contamination, we said this area is considered public, we said, in the summertime. So I want to emphasize that regarding contamination, this is considered public. Regarding Shabbat, I say it's not public. It's also not, by the fact that I said private, I want to emphasize it's not public. That's why I used the terminology private property regarding this this area, this valley, this field during the summer months, to emphasize that it's not public, and regarding contamination, it would have a status of public property. Rav Ashi says he offers a different approach. You know why it is considered private? Because it has the things that make something private. It has mechitzot. It has partitions. It has walls around. It's gated. It's a gated. This field that we're talking about was gated. So this is mechitzot, and we're talking now. But the thing about this valley, when they put the gates around this valley, this field, it was not gated for people to. It wasn't that there was a house inside. People were living there. That's not the case. Rather, the case was it was just a type of field, and they put a gate around the field. And we have a law to carry in a gated area. If the gated area is a very large area, so even though it's fence, they put up, you have a fence around this field, and a field that's larger than a certain size. The Gemara is going to say now, like Ula said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, if you have a karpaf yotem mibeit tzayim, if you have a field that's larger than, it's enough area that you could plant, every certain amount of land you're able to plant a certain amount of produce that could produce a certain amount of produce, and it could produce more than 2 sa'ah, a certain amount of, the measurement that they give over here for this type of field is having a measurement. He says a sa'ah is an area about 50 amot by 50 amot, which is about, let's say, if you want to say 100 feet by 100 feet, and 2 base sa'ah is an area about 50 amot by 100 amot, or around. Right. Okay. They say that maybe about 5. How much is an acre exactly, right? Yeah, but they have. Okay, so it comes out. It would be about 5,000. 2 swords, about 5,000 square amot, about 10,000 square feet. Right, Jack? You're exactly on target. So that's the size of this. So usually when you have a property that's enclosed, right? You enclose a property and you're living there. So that property would be considered private property because it's enclosed, right? It has walls around it. However, if an area which is very large, which is larger than this area, then the rabbis gave a certain rule that if it's not made for living purposes, so they said that would be considered like a carmelit. They said that you would not be able to carry more than 4 amot in such a place, only up to 4 amot, But even though the rabbis gave it certain type of status, but on a Torah level, it's definitely called private property. On the Torah level, the fact that it's fenced, it has a fence, a gate, whatever you want to call it, this area is private on a Torah level. It's rabbinically that the rabbis um, made this rule that if something is not, if it's made for living purposes, so then we said it doesn't make a difference how large you are, how large the field is. But if it's made not for living purposes, so then was probably because it has similarities to public, or it's not as private because it's not for living purposes. So therefore, the rabbi said that on a rabbinic level, it would have a status of a like laws like a Carmelite, but on a Torah level, it's private property. So therefore, that's the difference between a regular valley and this valley. The Gemara is saying it's two different cases. The Gemara had asked, we have a contradiction. One place you told me the valley does not have a status of public and not as a status, the field doesn't have a status of public or private, you told me. And here you told me the Mishnah said in Tyrus it had status of private. So this rabbi wants to say that the Rav Ashi wants to say the case of the Mishnah is talking about it was enclosed. The fields were enclosed, and that's why it has a status of, and even though on a rabbinic level, since it's so large and people was not made for personal, private, for living purposes, you're not allowed to carry. But on a Torah level, the fact that it has these fences around it is considered private. And this is considered private. If a person would carry from public property into this, within this gated area, he would be violating the Shabbat. So that's what the Gemara says. Like Ula said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that if you have this karpap, yotemi beit Sasayim, if you have this area that's not made for living purposes and it's larger than this 2 sa'ah, so we say if somebody throws shalhuk of ladira that was not fenced for people to live, afilu kora korayim, even if it's the size of kora korayim, which is very extremely, the core is 30 sa, right? So a core is 30 sa, and a bait core is 15 times 2 sa. So it's around 75,000 square amot. So it's a tremendous area. Even though you have this tremendous area, but nevertheless, hazorek l'tocho chayav. If you throw into this within this tremendous area, but since it has these fences around it, on a Torah level, he would be violating the Shabbat. My time. What's the reason why it's considered private? It was not made for living purposes, but nevertheless, it is still nevertheless, you have these walls, partitions around this field. The only issue is people are not living there. Since people don't live there, it's not made for living. So the rabbi said that we're going to rabbinically, this is going to be forbidden. And therefore, on a Torah level, it's still private. But the rabbis the rabbis are not taking away the fact that it's gated, and therefore it's considered on a Torah level, it's considered private property. So that's how the Gemara explains, as Mr. Haber would say, the case is different, the law is different, right? Because we have the fence around it. So the Gemara now says the following: Bishlama, I understand Rav Ashi lo amma kedula. The Gemara now, what the Gemara is about to do is why didn't this rabbi say why didn't he say like the other rabbi? Or why didn't he say like his own position somewhere else? The Gemara is going to say. The Gemara is going to analyze why this rabbi said his opinion and this rabbi said his opinion. Excuse me, why this rabbi did not follow what the other rabbi suggested. So the Gemara says, Bishlama Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi, who just said this answer, that the case is different, that the reason why that the valley, the field, has the status of private property was because the valley was gated. Bishlam Rav Ashi lo Oma Kedula. I understand why Rav Ashi did not say like Ula, because there's going to be a flaw in Ula's statement. Because remember, what did Ula say? Ula said that it's really not a Rishut Yachid, but it's called Rishut Yachid because to contrast it, that it's not a Rishut Rabim, that's what we call it Rishut Yachid. But that's not, but the language, the fact that you call it Rishut Yachid, private, sounds like it's private. Not that you're saying something is private because to say it's not public. If I say something is private, it means it's not public, but it sounds like it means it's private. Not that it's not public, but it's also not private. We're going to see there's going to be a little question on that. We can understand why you rather say it's a different case, and therefore the language of private fits in perfectly. So, Bishlama Rav Ashi Loma Kedula, we understand where Rav Ashi suggests that the case of the Mishnah that says that it's considered private on a Torah level because it's fenced and gated, we understand why he wants to say his position. He does not want to offer the other position. And Ula, the Gemara says, Ula, who said that the reason why it's called private in the summer is just to say that it's not public, but really it's not really private. My time day. Why didn't he say, like, he's in agreement of this fact. If you have this large area that's over, that we said a karfav that's more than 2 sa'ah, if you fenced it, he agrees that that's considered still private on a Torah level. It's considered private property, even though nobody's living. It's not made for people to live. But the fact that you have these fences there, it's considered private. So why he's in agreement to that law? So if you're in agreement to that law, that if you have this big field and not made for living purposes, not people, no White House on the lawn, there's no one living there, you still hold it's private. So why doesn't he suggest that the Mishnah is talking? That's the case of the Mishnah, and therefore you won't have to say that when it says private, it means private, but it's not public, but really it's also not private. My time, my day. Why doesn't he say, like, he is the author, right? Ula is the author of that statement of the karpaf, of this karpaf that's more than 2 sa'ah has a status of private property on a Torah level. He was the author of that statement. So he agrees with that statement that if you have these partitions over 2 sa'ah, it's considered private. So why doesn't he say that the Mishnah Tyrod is talking in that case? That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says, Amalach. He says, you know what? It can't be. He says, I can't explain the Mishnah Tyrod that it has walls, that the fields are surrounded by these gates of these walls. But it has partitions. But if the field, this bika, has gates around it, partitions around it, you won't call it a bika. It's not called a bika. It's not called a valley. It's not called the fields. It's called a karpaf. It's called a karpaf, which means it has something surrounding, has gates around it. So therefore, the fact that it's called bika means that it's open. It's not enclosed. So therefore, I have to come up with my answer that I gave. The Islam achitzot bika karele. Would you call it a bika? It's if a field that's surrounded by these partitions, they're called a karpafi. It's a karpaf. It won't be called a bika. The fact that we called it a bika means it's not surrounded by partitions. And if it's not surrounded by partitions, so then we're back to the drawing board. One place you said if it's not surrounded by partitions, it's not public and not private. And yet here we say regarding Shabbat, the Mishnah says it warning us up, it has a status of private. But if I have to come up to an answer to say, you know why it says private, it doesn't really mean that it's actually private. It means it's not public. in contrast to Tuma, contamination, that this area would be considered public regarding the laws of contamination. So I said it's private regarding, in that respect, regarding Shabbat, it's not public. But really, it's not also private. But that's what Ula says. Rav Ashi, the Rav Ashi, he says, so why didn't he, why, so this is a little question on his pshat, because he says it's gated, but if it's gated, then it's fenced, so but we didn't call it a karpaf, we didn't call it a karpaf, we called it a bika. So why doesn't he say the other response, the other answer of Ula, that when it says Rishut Yachid, it means that it's not public, but it doesn't actually mean that it's private. He says, what do you mean? You call it private. If you call it private, it means it's private. It doesn't just mean that it's not public. So that's what the Gemara says. He said, Rav Ashi says, Rishut Yachid Kani. It says Rishut Yachid. You refer to this field as a private property regarding Shabbat. If you call it private regarding Shabbat, it seems to Rav Ashi, that it means it's actually private property. That if someone would throw something into this from public property into, or carry from public into this area, if you call it Rishut Yachid, you would be chayav. It would be violation of the Shabbat and have to bring a korban chatat if he does it unintentionally. So the fact that it's called Rishut Yachid, therefore I had to come up with the answer to say that it's surrounded by partitions. So that's what he wants to say. Now, maybe we could suggest. Okay, maybe we'll just continue in front of the Gemara. So now the Gemara said, "But Carmel, right? The Gemara said that they are all the Gemara listed cases of Carmelite, right? The Gemara on Vavam and Aleph said a ocean, a valley, or these benches. It lists them and it says and Carmelite. Now we said the ocean, it has a status of a Carmelite. The benches that the people sit on to have a status of a Carmelite. The valley is a status of a Carmelite. So the Gemara's question is, how could you say Yam, ocean, benches, and Carmelite? These are, and sounds like this is one thing and this is something else. If I say and Carmelite, that means that this is the last thing is a Carmelite, and the other things aren't a Carmelite. So therefore, if I say bananas, apples, and oranges, that means oranges, the first two are not oranges. So if I say Yam, Bika, and then I say Carmelite, so that means the first two aren't Carmelite. So if I say bananas, orange, and fruit, right? So bananas, orange are fruit, right? Very good. So that's the Gemara's question. Otu kulu love Carmelite ninu? So what aren't they all Carmelite? These are all Carmelite. So what are you adding by saying by saying and Carmelite? See the way the Gemara is asking the question, meaning right. The fact that you call this a Carmelite sounds like this is a third thing that's not included in what we said before. But we have to figure out what's the difference. How is this unique? Something that was not included in what we said before. So stay tuned tomorrow. The time flies. We're already 7:25. Have a great day, everybody. You too. Have a great day. Thank you for joining. All the best, Emmanuel, Ralph. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.